Good morning, and welcome to today's event, In Conversation with Commissioner of Charities and Charity Council 2024. This In Conversation is jointly organized by the Office of Commissioner of Charities, Charity Council, Pro Bono SG, and the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre. I am Anbarasan from NVPC's Centre for Nonprofit Leadership and your MC for today's session. Before we begin, here are some housekeeping matters to take note of. Today, we will be using Pigeonhole Live for our Q&A session. You can submit your questions during the webinar and also vote for the questions that you would like to be answered. If you have a smartphone or tablet, just launch your internet browser and enter www.pigeonhole.at into the address bar. Then key the event code, which is InConvo 2024, as shown on the slide. For our audience on Zoom, you can click on the link shared in the chat function to launch Pigeonhole Live on your device. If you are viewing this webinar on your desktop or laptop, you should receive an invitation to launch Pigeonhole. Please note that today's discussion is not intended to substitute any form of professional legal advice. If you require specific legal advice, please consult a lawyer. Finally, may I take this opportunity to remind our in-person audience to turn their devices to silent mode. Our panelists for today are Mr. Desmond Chin, Commissioner of Charities, Ms. Theresa Goh, Chairperson, Charity Council, Mr. Tony Soh, CEO, NVPC, and Ms. Vivienne Lim, Board Member, Pro Bono SG. Our moderator for the panel discussion is Mr. Lenard Pattiselanno, Director, Centre for Nonprofit Leadership. Thank you to our distinguished guests for joining us today. This year, we are happy to once again host this session in a hybrid fashion. We have representatives from various charities in our audience and others joining us through Zoom. The agenda for today will start with an opening address by the Commissioner of Charities, Mr. Desmond Chin, and followed by a sharing on leadership in a changing philanthropy landscape by Mr. Lenard Pattiselanno. And we will end the first segment of this morning with a sharing by Ms. Vivienne Lim on legal liabilities of board members and management. After a short break, we will begin our panel discussion and wrap up today's event with a Q&A session. To start us off, it is my pleasure to invite Commissioner of Charities to give his opening address. Commissioner, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you, and I have met up at the tea break just now, quite a number of you, and it was a pleasure to have caught up with each of you. There are about, I think, 400 people who are presently physically here, and about 700 who have signed up virtually, and I really hope you'll come away with something useful this morning. I have a confession to make. My staff gave me a draft of today's speech. I was not very comfortable with it, and out of curiosity, I decided to use a chat GPT to write this speech. It turned out to be 25 pages long, and I don't think you all will appreciate that. Then I tried rewriting it again, and then I read it, and I said, the speech sounds condescending. So I had to rewrite again. He had 5 rewrites, so finally this is the speech, and I hope it doesn't put you to sleep, nor does it sound condescending. Now, it has been a very busy year for the COC's office, and I thought I'll share some of these things because some of the work that we have been doing had affected all of you, and I think some of the work had affected some of the sectors. So I thought I'd just run through it and to share that with you. In 2023, we had revised this Code of Governance, and incidentally, it was this time last year that we actually shared it. Essentially, we had pared down 4 tiers to 2 tiers, and we had set out a 6-principle base code of guidelines to provide charities with a better understanding of the importance of each of these principles. We gave some examples as well to try and make it easier. The team had, when started out and headed by Hao Yao, had one aim in mind, was how do we make it easier for charities, large or small, to be able to comply with the code of governance in order to run your charity for the people that you serve. So we added clarity also to the term limits, and we introduced the need for charities to start looking. And I said start looking. I didn't say must do everything for the ESG part of the house. We have since that last April met with several apex groups. These include the churches, the Buddhist temples, the Hindu temples, and the Malay Muslim organizations with the help of Mendaki. We will be meeting the Taoist Federation and their temple affiliates in May this year. The second thing that took up a lot of our time last year was what we call the Terrorism Financing Risk Mitigation Toolkit for Charity. This toolkit was launched in February last year. We have identified about 200 charities which operate in high-risk countries and near conflict zones where the risk of terrorist financing, or TF, is higher. These charities need to be careful that their charitable resources and properties are not inadvertently abused by terrorists or terrorist organizations. It may seem remote here, but trust me, it is quite real. So it is important for these charities, or any of you who are working in these countries, to put in place your TF measures as well as your anti-money laundering policies and processes. We had conducted 2 training sessions last year for the charities. We have done 1 in January this year, and there will be 2 more that we'll run this year for the charities that are involved. You're welcome to join us, of course. You know who you are, so please attend, as the money laundering and TF display similar transactional features such as concealment and disguise. It will do well for all our charities who operate in these areas to put in place your policies and processes as soon as possible. The third area, major area that we worked on, which affected quite a few of you, are what we call the enhanced disclosure regime. Now, to reduce the administrative burdens on charities who like to do fundraising in publicly accessible places, house to house, and street collections, we put in place this enhanced disclosure regime for registered and exempt charities and those with valid FRFCP permits. You need then to simply provide details of your fundraising activities in the charity portal 7 days before your fundraising begins. You also need to carry, the volunteers and your staff who are doing the fundraising need to carry identifiable documents and provide accessible contacts to members of the public so that they can check that we are running a bona fide fundraising activity. Non-registered charities and other entities still have to apply for the police license under their HHSC licensing scheme. On 1st of January this year, for all IPCs, we had then also introduced this thing called the Charity Compliance Indicator. The public can now view our IPC's level of compliance, and each IPC's profile page will now be shown in the charity portal. And they will see 4 things. 1, your fundraising expense ratio. 2, your latest declaration of your compliance with the Code of Governance. And 3, your annual returns, which means your GEC, your financial statements, and annual report. And lastly, whether you had received any governance or transparency awards in the last 3 years. Why did we do this? Well, I think the public will be much more assured that they are donating to a cause that is close to their heart through a charity that has met the critical compliance requirements. So this gives the public confidence to do so. It also helps our charities to raise your funds. Now, the third major piece then was what we call the grant maker scheme. I think there are about 40, 45 grant makers in Singapore today. It is a lighter touch regime because it is their own money that they are using for their charitable objectives. This scheme was started in 2007. We reviewed it last year. And basically, we touched on 3 areas. Basically, we allowed the donations, made clearer the allocation of donations that can be made overseas as well as locally. We had allowed the conduct of some non-grant making activities like in-house research and direct services, which some of the grant makers would like to do. We had a consult with them. And the third one is really disbursement to be made through non-grant instruments like social impact bonds and so forth. Now, that was 2023. This year, I just want to highlight two things that we are doing that will eventually affect or be of use to all of you. The first is the Enterprise Risk Management Tool. We are collaborating with KPMG and Singapore Institute of Technology, or SIT, to develop a supplementary toolkit to complement the 216 Risk Management Toolkit for Charities. The Risk Management Survey for Charities and the 2024 Risk Management Toolkit specifically examines the lessons that we had learned from COVID-19. We had also identified new and emerging risks, as well as business continuity planning and management. It is adaptable to suit each of your charity's needs and shares practical insights and best practices that you may adopt. We are organizing a session to explain the toolkit for all of you on the 26th of April this year. And charities, you should have received your invitation by now, and if you have not, please approach myself or any of our staff. The second major piece that we are trying to sort out this year is the review of the Charity Transparency Framework and the Charity Transparency and Governance Award process. With the implementation of the new Code of Governance, we will commence the review on these areas to ensure that what we do is aligned with the new Code of Governance. We are gathering feedback from stakeholders, and we'll share the details when we are ready in the coming months. Now, I would like to now share three enduring issues of concern to the COC's office, which I thought would be useful to speak at this forum. In the year 2023, last year, the COC's office had received 61 pieces of complaints on different issues of governance. I thought I'll share a table with you. As you can see, 28 of the 61 deals with misuse of funds, poor internal controls, not very good operational matters, and poor fundraising approaches. We have interpersonal conflicts between persons in the charity, AGM-related matters, conflict of interest, which is worrisome, and HR issues. Total 61 distinct pieces of complaints. After studying all of them, I have come to the sad conclusion that these issues have one common denominator, which is really a very ineffective and a contentious board. It is a people issue. Now this, in turn, when you have a poorly run board, this in turn will lead to a poorly run charity with very bad governance, weak internal controls, and very dysfunctional dynamics between individuals. So this is why, as we keep repeating in the new Code of Governance, that having a right board member is crucial to all charities, whether you're Tier 1, Tier 2, small, large, whatever sector you belong to, please choose the right board members. You must also choose the right board members with the right motivation, who are committed to the charity's causes. They must possess the right relevant skills to serve. If they don't have, please go and get them trained. And they are not in the charity for profit or self-interest. Many of the 61 complaints shows indications of profit and self-interest. Good dynamics within the board and between the board and executive team is also a must. If this is absent, there will be chaos. There should also be no place for cronyism, Kawanism, anyism in the sector. But sadly, there still is. We have seen a lot of these in the 61 complaints. We must put a stop to this if it happens in your charity. So that's why we say we think that 10 years is sufficient time for a charity to plan for board renewal and for board succession. Please do not let over-familiarity or inflated sense of importance get in the way of board renewal and succession planning. On a personal note, I thought I'd just share this. You know, I came to this office in late 2020. I had my first work review with my boss a few months later. In my first work review with my boss, I gave her a list of 3 potential Commissioner of Charities. She asked me if I was going to resign the next month. So I told her, no, the only reason I gave her the 3 names is for succession planning, in case I drop dead tomorrow. So she said, thank you very much. And in the subsequent second year, I gave her 2 names, and the third year, I gave her 1. So she has a total of 6 potential COCs to choose from, should I not make it through this speech. So please, there is importance of succession planning. I cannot emphasize it, right? Overemphasize it. None of us are indispensable, right? We serve, and we serve well, but when it's time to step down, please do so, and we allow others to take our charities to the next higher level of success. The second area that I want to briefly talk about is governance. Our charity sector is very diverse. I was just sharing that with someone earlier on. It comprises of charities that have different charitable purposes. They have structures, different sizes, different financial strength, and different competencies. All of our charities are at different stages of development. Some are more established, some are just starting out. Now, regardless of whichever developmental stage you are in, good governance and accountability are fundamentals that must be observed and practiced all the time, because you are dealing with public monies. Unfortunately, we have seen sufficient cases of poor governance in charities to be suitably worried. I just thought I'd share a couple of them with you. In a temple that we once visited, my staff were present, including myself, to witness the handover of the monies and the jewelry from the existing MC to the new MC that had been just elected 10 minutes ago. There was this giant safe. In the safe, there was lots of money, lots of jewelry, and gold pieces that were smiling at us. After the handover was completed, the old MC and the new MC shook hands, and they walked off, and trotted off to have their lunch. And my staff had to call them back and said, you forgot to lock the safe. They sheepishly turned back and locked the safe. In yet another temple that we visited, because of alleged mishandling of donated monies, my staff, which was making the inquiry, asked the management team there whether they had a 2-key system in place. You know, when you collect money from devotees and all that, you need to have this strong room, safe, 2-key system, right, to access. The charity proudly declared that they have a 2-key system. And my staff asked, where is it? They pointed to the key press. And lo and behold, there were 2 keys sitting alongside each other. Yeah. When my staff told me this, I don't know whether to laugh or to cry, but it's very funny now. It wasn't very funny then. Huh? Yeah. So we cannot be careless about such things. We cannot be clueless about such things. We need to do better than that. Whether we are a small or large charity, new or mature, good governance means we need to constantly build trust with our stakeholders, that we need to be efficient and effective in the way in which we operate. We need to comply with the legal and ethical requirements and standards, and we need to ensure proper accountability, especially over the use of funds that we have taken from the public. We need to understand our risks and manage them well, and keep faith in the strategic direction, vision, and mission that we have embarked on. Now, good governance really, at the end of the day, is the board's responsibility. And that is who the COC's office will turn to if there's any mismanagement. This reminds me of a time when I used to work in my previous life in the Ministry of Home Affairs, and the permanent secretary then used to look at me, and because I was from prisons, and he said, Desmond, if anything goes wrong in the prison, there's only one neck I will hold. I said, yes, innocently. And I asked, whose? He said, it's yours. Similarly, in a charity board, I'm afraid, whether you like it or not, it is the board's responsibility for the good and well-governed charity that you are in. If any of you have board members who are not very sure of their roles or their fiduciary duties, then we really need to start sending them in a systematic way for the training so that they will be able to do better and do their best. So it's timely that Vivienne will be speaking on the legal liabilities of board members and management later. And so let's listen well, and I'm sure we can put what we learned from her into practice. The third area I just want to briefly mention is on mandatory submissions, which are really mandatory. This time last year, I had shared that some charities have not been submitting their mandatory submissions, which is they don't submit their financial statements, there's no annual reports, and neither do they do their GEC. Now, proper and timely regulatory submissions are not merely a legal or procedural requirement. They are a cornerstone of effectiveness, transparency, and accountability. We need to remember this. In the past several months, we have been plowing through the 2,400 charities to find out who are those who have not submitted, and we have narrowed down to 300 charities. It was a relief because last year it was 600, but now it's 300. But we made some very interesting discoveries. First, some charities are what we call ghosts. They have outdated emails, there's contact numbers that belong to Mongolia. Board member profiles have not been updated, and the address of the charity is a shell. So I'm not sure whether this is a terrorist financing organization or a money laundering one. Other charities have been really inactive for many years, but for some reason they have not deregistered. They should if they do not want to continue the work that they have set out to do. Third category are those that don't even know that they are charities. When my staff called them, they said, "You mean we are a charity?" I said, "Yes, you have been a charity since 1942. So it's quite a hilarious process. Huh? Well, it adds some light-hearted moments to a very sober work. So we are now in processing of reaching out to all of them to understand first what are their reasons for their non-submissions. We have started with the religious groups, and then we are meeting, so we have gone to the Hindu temples, the Buddhist temples, the Malay Muslim organizations, the Christian churches as well. We are meeting the Taoist Federation in May. We will be meeting the arts groups and the others in the second half of this year as well. And then it goes on, right, until we've covered the 300. We will then be writing to these charities to explain to them, again, the need to comply with the charity laws, how to go about doing it, and to contact us if they are unsure. We will be more than happy to help them. We will send reminders if need be, but I must say that after sufficient reminders have been sent and nothing is done, then I'm afraid some sterner action will have to follow. So I do encourage those who have not done their annual submissions, please to do so quickly. You can contact our office and we can see how we can help you. As charities, we have a duty to the public. We have a duty of transparency and accountability to our donors and to our stakeholders. Now, the final section I just want to talk about is the resources that are available for charities to use. Over the years, we have put in place fundings and all types of resources for the charity sector. These, I hope, will be of help, especially for the newer charities that are starting out. I'd like to just briefly run through it so that we are all abundantly clear where we can go to for help. We have this thing called a Charities Capability Fund. It is $23 million strong to be used over 5 years, from April 2022 to March 2027. The more you use and utilize it, the more reason we have to go back to the government to ask for a top-up. If it is not utilized properly, then there's no reason for a top-up. So that's the reason why I'm sharing this. I thought I'll share with you a breakdown. Some of you will see yourselves in one of these categories, I hope. Of the 5 grants that are there, ICT, or the Info Comms Tech grant, is 99% utilized. For consultancy, it's 88%, shared services, 86%, training grant, 75%. Very good. Please continue to do so. Collaboration grant, 25%, poorly utilized. Please, after this, go and utilize it. Right? It will be of help to you. So I'm really very heartened that for many of the grants, it is at least 75, if not more. if you utilize these grants, we will be able to go back and justify asking for more after 2027. There's a review that will be happening soon. Secondly, we have 11 shared service partners, if we are not aware. Now, these partners are listed, so please take a look at them. They are wonderful organizations and they are wonderful people within. And their heart is committed to helping to provide guidance in many areas for charities, which include electronic regulatory submissions to help you navigate that, the governance-related matters that if you feel you want to improve, you should go to them, on talent management and digitalization. They run consultancy, clinics, training sessions, and webinars that will be helpful for those who want to learn, who want to grow, and want to develop further. We are also working on what we call the Shared Services Blueprint to make it easier for our charities to navigate the various resources available. Together with the Charity Council, we will provide an overview of all the resources available. We are going to map them in accordance to the new Code of Governance principles and functional needs, and we will put it on the charity portal, and we hope to do so by next week. It's like a master list for quick reference for the charities, so you don't have to go to different websites and get confused along the way. Now, lastly, we also have all sorts of guides, codes, and templates because we have been collaborating with very different partners to organize all sorts of webinars and training on governance, fundraising, and legal matters. We have a whole array of these training sessions that have been videotaped and put onto the charity portal and onto the YouTube channel. If you are interested, you should go there and look for by different categories. It will be helpful for you to onboard your charity boards or your new executive team in areas of interest that you feel you want to know more of. So I had spoken on 3 things, and I hope, or 4 things, and I hope we will all continue to make good governance the foundation for all our charities because it's fundamental. I hope that we will continue to entrench the practice of board renewal and succession planning further in our charities because it is necessary. And I hope for those who have not done so, please ensure your proper and timely regulatory submissions, as it is mandatory. And there are ample charity resources available. Please utilize them. If you're not sure, call us. We'll be more than happy to help. Now, the COC's office, or rather the COC's office, first instinct is not prosecution, neither is it punishment. It is always our joy to see each of our charities succeed and to fulfill your mission. When you do well, our beneficiaries gain, and we can all rejoice. Singapore's charity sector must remain a model of transparency, of accountability, of effective management that will stand the test of time. But we can only do this together, and I hope that together we will continue to make a difference in the lives of those that we care and to engender public trust by the high standards of governance that we hold ourselves to. If you have forgotten everything I said, just remember 3 things. Our common enemy is poor governance. Our common goal is making a difference in the lives of those that we serve. And by that, I don't mean just the beneficiaries, I mean our executive teams, our board members, and the staff of our charities as well. Our cornerstone is public trust. Without that, everything falls apart. Finally, I just want to conclude by thanking a few people without whom today's session is not possible. So if you join me, I'd like to thank Pro Bono Singapore and NVPC for co-organizing this event. I also want to thank Theresa, Tony, and Vivienne for being on the panel to answer all the questions that I don't know how to answer later, and for Lenard for moderating the discussion. Without him, this ain't going to happen. So thank you very much. I wish you all a fruitful time this morning.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your valuable insights. To bring us through the next presentation, it's my great pleasure to welcome on stage Mr. Lenard Pattiselanno. Lenard joined MVPC in July 2017 as Director of Corporate Giving and is currently serving as Director, Centre for Non-Profit Leadership. Before joining MVPC, Lenard was at Sports Singapore, where he led various divisions. Prior to that, Lenard served in the Republic of Singapore Navy for 13 years. He currently serves on board of OJOY, a comprehensive mental health care and community wellness organization. The title of his sharing is Leadership in a Changing Philanthropy Landscape, Supporting Charities with a Refreshed CNPL. Lenard, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'm so glad you didn't use the ChatGPT version, right? So you can really feel the heart and authenticity of the message that we're bringing across to all our stakeholders. Now, I'd like to take the opportunity today to share with you how the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre is refreshing our approach to supporting charities in a changing philanthropy landscape. For those of you who are less familiar with MVPC, we are stewards of the City of Good Vision for Singapore, where everyone gives their best towards a more caring, inclusive, and compassionate society. We work with individuals, communities, businesses, and leaders to encourage a giving culture in Singapore, and we do this by collaborating and finding solutions together through various initiatives. So let's begin with an overview of the changing philanthropy landscape. Now, in the broader Singapore context, we are familiar with the refreshed social compact and the Forward Singapore narrative, as well as the positioning of Singapore as a philanthropic hub. And this points towards a resurgence in philanthropy. And specific to the context for charities, you have heard the Commissioner mention earlier about the revised Code of Governance, signaling an emphasis in this area. And there's also intensifying competition for resources. Right? It gets more and more difficult, especially in the current economic climate. But at the same time, new ways of giving are emerging, as we have seen from a very promising pilot on giving circles that we are now starting to scale. And these factors are driving how we create value to support effective leadership in this changing landscape. In the area of governance, we have enhanced board services. In terms of philanthropy and resources, we have programs on fundraising and impact measurement. And when it comes to new ways of giving, we are developing more collaborations and community-led philanthropy initiatives. And this comes together as a refreshed value proposition for nonprofits. And it will be delivered through an integrated approach that leverages on MVPC's range of networks and programs. And as a first step, what we have done is that we have refreshed CNPL. For those of you who are familiar or have been in the space for a while, you would associate CNPL with our board-related services, such as Board Pulse, Board Match, Board Advisory, and Board Connect. We have since redesigned CNPL to encompass all the work that we do with nonprofits across MVPC. And we have framed the approach according to these three areas: community, capability, and collaboration. Now, starting with community, we are driving synergies through a new frame of thinking, and this is in the form of the CNPL community, an integrated system to amplify the value proposition for nonprofits through a new connected community. For those of you who are familiar with Company of Good, which represents the unified approach we take with companies, this community is the non-profit equivalent. Right, the community will facilitate greater synergies across the range of initiatives, and in particular, Giving.SG, where we're able to better support your fundraising and volunteering needs. And this is a good segue to the capability development section, where there are three focus areas, starting with fundraising. And we will look at extending the value and impact through Giving.SG across the following aspects. For awareness and reach, Research and analysis on donors will facilitate targeted communications to improve activation. We will also have learning communities, resources, and other programs to level up fundraising skills, ongoing enhancements to the platform, and thank you for all of you who have been very patient with the recent MVP, as well as efforts to better integrate our marketing activities with your campaigns on giving.sg. Analytics, financial reports, and trends will help to inform fundraising plans. And of course, the technical support and advisory for campaign development will also be available. Now, the second area of focus for capability development is impact measurement. I know this is one of everyone's favorite topics, or IM, as we call it. And we are partnering with TalkBot to explore how IM can be implemented at a wider scale and in a more practical fashion. I think for many of us who have been in the space and we recognize the challenges with impact measurement, there's always a delicate balance of how much is enough, right? You recognize that if you overdo it, it becomes a cost and actually might exceed the ROI. But if you don't focus on it, it also affects your ability, right? It affects your ability to measure progress, to communicate your value, which directly impacts your ability to raise funds, right? So this is an area that we are wanting to double down and focus on and to support you on that journey. The final focus area for capability development is our board services. And we'll be running the second edition of the National Nonprofit Board Leadership Study in 2024. And this will enhance our insights on governance and refresh the Board Pulse diagnostic tool. We'd also like to highlight the charity board match, which has been enhanced with a partnership with SID and NCSS, and we'll hear more about that during the panel. And in the last section, we'll cover collaboration. Yes, I noticed Commissioner's slide earlier on the utilization for collaboration when it comes to grants. We can appreciate that a lot of therapy is required when we try to advance collaborations. So we do recognize the challenges, but I think at the end of the day, we do also recognize the value of collaborating. And here are several areas that we have listed down in terms of platforms or initiatives that we can partner with nonprofits. The first one is CoLabs, which is a community-based collaborative approach where diverse stakeholders come together to collectively unpack complex social issues and are inspired towards co-creating solutions. Given that the issues are complex, we like to use the metaphor of the blind man and the elephant, right, where it's very difficult to see the whole system. So the CoLabs approach involves putting the system in the room and embarking on a journey to learn, align, and act together. To date, we've had 6 editions of CoLabs covering topics on children and youth, people with disabilities, seniors, migrant workers, dementia, and most recently, lower-income families. Now, the next area is giving circles, as I mentioned a little bit earlier in the presentation. It's an initiative that we are currently scaling from a systems view. And in essence, a giving circle is a group of people who come together to pool their 5 T's: time, talent, treasure, ties, and testimony to be able to support a family or a cause. It is a form of community-led philanthropy which has so much potential in view of the sense of community ownership. Charities are a key aspect of giving circles as a system, and we can share more details as a follow-up. And then we have platforms such as State of Play and the Sector Showcase, where charities can interact with corporates and the philanthropic intermediaries respectively. And I'd like to take the opportunity just to share a short clip on the recent State of Play that was held at the City of Good Summit in February.
State of Play is a trade fair style event where companies get a chance to know company partners.
My experience at State of Play this year was great. It was such an eye-opener. The networking opportunities were valuable. I spoke to MSF, to AIC, Rise Above, It's Raining Raincoats, and Bylaws Community Services. These charities were not working in silos. They were actually speaking to one another and helping each other how to better serve the common pool of beneficiaries.
Both communities, businesses, have and need each other in order to progress and thrive together.
At State of Play, we didn't really set out to find a specific NPO. It was more for us to discover and to explore what are the organizations out there that we could interact with.
My colleagues and I have met fellow charities who are eager to look at new programs for their own beneficiaries. At the same time, they are also looking for corporates that can support them. When corporates come to us, we can also bring them together.
A lot of the information was put up front on posters. I could focus really on the conversation, understand really what was behind the impact that they were trying to deliver.
The kind of people that we met today, we've had international folks, we've had local folks, they are really converts in giving back.
The State of Play really helped us to reach out, not only to just establish new partners, it helps to strengthen lost relationships as well.
And in that process, come to solutions that are more impactful and that will eventually benefit our community.
So that was just a short clip on the State of Play, and we do look forward to seeing you at next year's City of Good Summit. Now, in summary, this is the refreshed CMPR and how consolidating our resources to support nonprofits enhances the ability to scale and create impact. And in conclusion, I would like to encourage everyone to indicate your interest to join the community or participate in the National Nonprofit Board Leadership Study in 2024, or connect with us to learn more about any of the programs that I mentioned in today's sharing. So I'll leave this on the screen for you. You can take a moment to scan the QR code and just indicate your interest, and we will be in touch. With that, thank you everyone for your kind attention, and happy to take any other questions during the panel as well. Thank you so much. Back to you, Emma.
Thank you, Leonard, for sharing how CNPL can help the charities. On a side note, Leonard is my boss, and he volunteered me to be the MC for this event. So thank you, Leonard, for the opportunity. To round off the first segment of our program, I would now like to invite Ms. Vivienne Lim. Vivienne is a civil and commercial litigator who has been in practice since 1996 and is the co-founder of Genesis Law Corporation. Outside of a legal practice, Vivienne is the chairperson of the CHIJ Board of Management, Vice Chairperson of Catholic Foundation Limited, and a board member of Pro Bono SG, among numerous other appointments. Now, Vivienne has acquired vast experience and expertise in charity law, and is well apt to share on our next topic, legal liabilities of board members and management. Vivienne, please.
Thank you very much, Amma. Good morning, everyone. Just want to start by thanking you for letting me have the opportunity to share in this conversation. Actually, I should probably start by apologizing because my slides have no pictures, no videos. We lawyers are very boring people, so it's all words, so bear with me. So I was asked to share on the topic of legal liabilities of board directors and management. I don't think I can share within 15 minutes or 20 minutes what typically takes up to several months to teach in law school and many, many, many more years in practice. But what I propose to do today is to just share general principles, not a whole list of statutes and compliance points where I think that would just totally overwhelm you and put you to sleep, but just very general principles that I think you can hopefully bear in mind as you go back to your respective charities. So I've been involved in incorporating and advising charities since about maybe 18 to 20 years ago. And I have to say quite a lot has changed in terms of the charity landscape and the mindset in the intervening years. In the early years, someone maybe takes a board seat because they are the hands-on founder or they're prominent members of society who are offered a seat. And when you talk to them about the liabilities, they actually know very little about it, or they are not even aware that there are liabilities that come with this board seat. It's almost like an honor to be there kind of thing. So initially, I tend to try to scare them with like, oh, do you know of this whole list of penalties? These are your liabilities and these are your responsibilities. But there's usually, at the start, very little queries on it. But fast forward many, many years later, post NKF reforms, and I started encountering more on the other end of the spectrum, where there are many queries on many aspects of personal liabilities. In fact, volunteers and people sitting on the board started to get quite worried. They would ask a lot of questions of their management, and the poor management typically has to come to lawyers frequently to ask for advice on many, many aspects, even on the wording in this constitution, this clause, why do you say that, on everything that came to management, to the extent that it's almost debilitating, and I think governance costs would then have gone up significantly. I think the ideal state is somewhere in between. And I think that's the stage we are currently at, where things are better balanced, primarily because I think there's a lot of clarity, information and guidance from Charities Unit, from Charities Council. So there's actually healthy awareness of what is needed. People can find information readily, resources online, and they know where to turn to for help. So there's less fear, and I think this is the healthy balance we hope to achieve, and I'm glad that we are actually somewhere there, seems to be there now. So now let me dive into this topic of legal liabilities of board members and management. Actually, ultimately, it's legal liabilities of board members, because who does the duty ultimately lie with? And I think Commissioner already shared about it at his address. The buck stops with the board. Oh, I'm supposed to control this, sorry. Yes, so the governing board is the members of the governing body of the charity. It can be the trustee if you're a trust, the management council if you're a society, but it's basically the governing body which has control and management and of the administration of the charity. This is defined in the Charities Act. Typically, it refers to your board of directors, your trustees, or management committee. The buck stops with you. You can't say, my staff forgot to file the annual returns, I didn't know, things like that are actually not excuses. The buck stops with the governing board. So when we talk about legal liabilities, there's always generally two aspects of it: civil liabilities and criminal liabilities. Criminal liabilities are the scary ones. I mean, the ones that the prosecution is taken on by the state or by the regulators against the individual who run foul of it. They arise from legislation. Generally, these are the common statutes that apply to a charity. So if you're a company, the Companies Act would apply to you. If you're a society, the Societies Act will apply to you. If you're a trustee, the Trustees Act will apply to you. Then, of course, on top of all that, you have your Charities Act and the whole slew of subsidiary legislation under there. You have the Income Tax Act, especially if you're an IPC, you also have to comply with all the tax regulations. Now you have things like the Terrorism Suppression of Financing Act, the Corruption, Drug Trafficking and Other Serious Crimes Act. Actually, there's also a whole list of other things like PDPA, Employment Act, CPF Act, Workplace Safety Act. So, long and short, yes, there's a lot of things that you do have to be mindful of, right? It's about being aware of what applies to your charity and making changes up from time to time, putting in place processes so that you don't run foul of the law. This is the criminal aspect where if you breach it, the state takes a prosecution or the regulators may call you up for coffee and contact you, right? The other aspect is civil liabilities. Civil liabilities are suits that one person or one entity takes against another, usually to claim for damages or for loss of monies. Duties that are owed by the board is to the company. It's not to anybody else, but to the company. So the right party to take an action would be the company. So typically, it is the company under perhaps the new direction, the direction of a new board that takes over, that takes legal action against previous directors who may have breached their duty. This is duties owed to the company. Then, of course, you may be wondering, what about duties owed externally? Generally, there is no personal liability on the part of officers to third parties, unless you're shown to be like, alter ego of the company and the whole company is just a sham and facade, and actually it's just you running the show. So you lift corporate veil and you are personally liable for the debts and acts of the company. But generally, there's no duties owed to third parties. So, for example, you're not liable for the rent if your charity can't afford to pay the rent. So those are the third-party type of civil liabilities, the other type. I'm just lying it out so that at least you have an appreciation of the different levels of liability. So when we talk, this is the only picture I have in my slides. So when we talk about liabilities under the law, I think it's important to remember that it's actually very foundational, base level, compliance level type of liability. Beyond, if you breach that level, you get into trouble with the law. But it's actually very base level. When we talk about more aspirational levels, we're talking about conformance levels, where you have your code of governance that you've heard about earlier, where you have board diversity, you're encouraged to have change of tenure, environmental consciousness, proper volunteer management, proper vision, mission, and stuff like that. Those are higher aspirational levels. Those are the comply or explain. If you don't have diversity on your board, you are not likely, you're not going to be charged for anything. So that is actually much higher level where you hope to aspire towards building a better governed charity. But that level does not attract criminal or civil liabilities. And then, of course, on which you hope, beyond compliance, beyond conformance, that's where you build the performance of your charity. You want to have peace of mind to be able to do the good that you do without having to worry about, whether I'm in breach of any legal provisions. So whilst legal compliance may sound daunting with all its potential penalties, we must remember it's really baseline expectations, without which you or your organizations won't have the peace of mind to grow. So as I said, I don't want to go into, this is the law, this is what you have, but actually to just distill it into four general principles that should be easy for you to adopt. So the first one is duty to act for proper purpose. Proper purpose refers to actions which are generally for the benefit of the organization. So as a charity, your objects must be exclusively charitable. And that's a very important object. And you must have clarity as a management and as board, what is the charitable object of your entity? And make sure you take all steps to ensure all resources go towards furthering those purposes and not for any other purpose. Of course, a bad example would be your objects are to care for the poor in Singapore, and then you allow your charities to support or fund political purposes or fund overseas purposes. So that's a very clear breach of the duty to act for a proper purpose. Number two, the duty to act in the organization's best interest. Now this is, I think, one of the most important duty. As a management and as a board, you owe fiduciary duties to the organization. You thus need to exercise discretion and make decisions in a manner that serves the charity's purpose. Related to this is the duty to avoid conflicts of interest. Because when you say conflict of interest, it's to act when you have your personal interest in something, that's in conflict with the interest of the organization. So what amounts to an organization's best interest is something that you have to consider actively. It may change. It is clear that your organization, which is your organization, but I think as time goes, it might widen a bit to stakeholders. Like right now, organizations also include your employees. You also have to consider the stakeholders like members of the public. But generally, you have to remember that you just have to take steps and make decisions that are in the best interest of the organization. This duty to avoid conflict of interest is one of those that many people trip up, and where a lot of the reported cases are on this point of duty to avoid conflicts of interest. I think the clear reported case that most of you are probably familiar with would be the whole National Kidney Foundation series of cases. There were actually quite a lot of cases on that. What happened in that case was that the new NKF board commenced a civil suit against the previous board. in particular the board chairman, board treasurer, and a former board member, seeking damages for breaching of fiduciary duties, including abdication of management powers to the CEO. And there was no independent supervision, failing to act in good faith, and also failing to notice that actually the CEO was acting in conflict with the interests of the entity. I think he had contracts which he had an interest in, but the entity actually contracted with Forte Systems, which is the one that Mr. Jorai had shares in as well. So that was a very clear case of conflict of interest, and they sued, and I think eventually they settled. There was also criminal cases arising from there where they were found guilty. The third category, duty of care, skills, and diligence. And this is the one where I think you have to take duty to observe care, skill, and diligence. What constitutes due care is not exactly defined, but from general law, it means taking reasonable steps to understand, to guide, to give sufficient time, and to request information to stay informed. So for example, if you have 50 directorships, I think it's a bit hard to say you gave sufficient time and attention to this board. If you don't attend board meetings at all, is it reasonable to say that the person has been giving enough time to guide and monitor the organization? If you don't ask questions at all, are you being the weak board that Commissioner talked about earlier? So this whole duty of diligence and care and skill includes exercising sufficient oversight of your charity. And that's what is needed. You don't need to be involved in day-to-day activities, and nobody's expecting you to be everyone has to be an accountant or a lawyer or whoever that you understand. It is actually pretty much about supervision, managing, and if you really need to boil it down to, it's about asking questions. Having the courage to ask questions until you're satisfied that a certain decision that's being taken is what is good for the charity. I just cited these two cases. They're not charity cases, but they are cases in which the court said that they found these directors who were engaged in executive and non-executive capacity, and they said that you are subjected to a minimum objective standard of care, and that involves the obligation to take reasonable steps to place oneself in a position to guide and monitor the management of the company. In the Indo-Pacific case as well, the court held that the defendant, in not looking into various matters, would have led him to realize that the company was being defrauded. So basically, if the company is being defrauded, and you didn't even realize, or you didn't even ask any questions, or there are strange transactions, but you turn the other way and you didn't investigate further, well, that is considered to be a breach of the director's duty of care. There were, under this whole duty of care, skills, and diligence, there are actually a whole slew of other cases from the NKF case where both Richard Yong and Lucy Sun were convicted for breach of duties of directors' duties to exercise due diligence. I think they didn't look carefully on this software upgrade, and there were breaches of conflicts of interest, and I think they were fined and also debarred. I will also park under this limb of duty of care the duty of building a framework and process to ensure that your society or your charity complies with all applicable legislation. So your applicable legislation that I listed out earlier, you've got to have in place processes to make sure that all your applicable legislations are met, including ensuring that your key officers and trustees of your charity are not disqualified from acting in their respective office, ensuring good governance practices, ensuring prudence over financial matters. I think this one also includes keeping accounting records properly, filing of financial returns and annual returns, and calling of meetings. So all these fall under this whole duty of diligence. I want to park it all under this duty so that at least in your mind you know, okay, this is under my duty of diligence for which I, as a board director, have to make sure that my charity complies with. And lastly, the duty to act honestly. I think this underpins everything. And it may also excuse and grant relief for negligence or default of any breach of duty. Of course, you might think, oh, of course, everyone has to act honestly. But if you go through the cases that have been reported, it's actually about criminal breach of trust. A lot of them failed to act honestly. And this failure to act honestly also might disentitle someone to rely on Section 3911 of the Companies Act, where the court can grant relief for negligence, for breach of duty, for breach of trust, if at the end of the day, the officer, who's the board director, acted honestly and reasonably having regard to the circumstance. It's also in the Companies Act where there is actually no liability if one in good faith relies on reports, statements from employees or fellow directors, or you have professional or expert advice when you are exercising your powers. So the point is that this duty to act honestly underpins everything, and even if the charity somehow slips up, it can act as a defense to excuse such breaches. I'll just end off by highlighting this case of TT Durai versus PP, where in this case there was an intent to defraud by using an invoice containing statement that was false, and he knew it was intended to mislead NKF. He was eventually convicted under this provision. But what the court held was that the fact that the party that was cheated is a charity is an aggravating factor, as it involves the use of public and involves the funds obtained from the public. Sorry, I don't know why it didn't appear on my slides, but I think the point that I was trying to make is that under this case, what the court held was that cheating a charity is an aggravating factor. So you want to be very careful with charity funds, because in mitigation, you can't say, look, you know, this is not my money or the monies of the charity. It is the monies of the charity, and it's made worse that these monies were raised from the public. So I just want to conclude by saying that, look, all of you are involved in very meaningful altruistic work in various fields. Management of a charity is indeed a very serious duty. The topic of liability on the part of board members and management can often sound very daunting and scary. But as can be seen, if you boil it down to general principles of honesty, of exercising sufficient due diligence, of having clarity of purpose, and of making decisions in the interests of the charity, principles which most of you probably will not quibble with or are likely to already be practicing, then you are in a good place to build and are already building the foundations on which your charity can grow, and you can go on to do the good that you are doing and which you aspire to do with much peace of mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivienne, for reminding us again of the legal liabilities of boards and management. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a break. Let's take 10 minutes and gather back again for the next segment, where our distinguished panel will be sharing insights on leadership in a changing philanthropy landscape, driving societal impact through good governance. See you shortly. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We ask that you take your seats. Our next segment will be a panel discussion on leadership in a changing philanthropy landscape, driving societal impact through good governance. May I now invite to the stage Mr. Desmond Chin, Commissioner of Charities, Ms. Theresa Goh, Chairperson, Charity Council, Mr. Tony Soh, CEO, NVPC, and Ms. Vivienne Lim, Board Member, Pro Bono SG, and along with our moderator, Mr. Lenard Pattiselanno. As a reminder to our audience here and on Zoom, you can submit your questions via Pigeonhole. We will strive to address them during the panel discussion or at the Q&A segment. Over to you, Lenard.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amba. All right. Good morning again, everyone. And really happy to be able to do this. And I'd like to remind everyone that we are having an in-conversation and not an interrogation, right? So it's a useful opportunity to be able to learn from everyone. Okay, now the theme of this panel is leadership in a changing philanthropy landscape, driving societal impact through good governance. And I thought it would be useful to draw some inspiration from the effective non-profit board framework that was developed from the National Non-Profit Board Leadership Study in 2020. Now, in that framework, there were 3 levels: dynamics and culture, strategy and role, and structures and processes. And within dynamics and culture, there's aligned values and motivations, board and management dynamics. Within strategy and role, there's role clarity, strategic foresight and active participation. And finally, within structures and processes, it covers areas of governance and compliance, board composition and diversity, and board renewal. So as you can tell, it covers pretty much the full spectrum, and this panel will be more than happy to address as many as your queries as possible. And if not, we will find other ways to be able to answer your questions. So with that in mind, thank you again to all the panelists for your time and your contributions today. I would like to begin with Madam Chair. Can you share 1 or 2 thoughts that have resonated with you from the presentations or whatever you have heard so far today?
Okay. Before I answer that, I just want to say hello, how are you to all of you, yeah, and those online as well. It's been 1 year since our last conversation, yeah, and I just want to let you know the last 1 year has been a very meaningful journey for me, yeah, and I hope it's also been a meaningful journey for you, working with us and the Commissioner of Charity. To answer Leonard's question, I was actually furiously taking notes from the earlier presentations. As far as the Commissioner's presentation, I've always enjoyed his witty banter, even for such a serious topic like corporate governance. But my main takeaway is he has summarized and he has categorically mentioned that the most important thing we need to focus on is the quality of charity boards. Yeah, so that's the starting point. Yeah, and a summary of those charts, I will put it into 3 main things: board succession, board development, and board assessment. And I would like to talk about it much more at a later stage today, if time permits. But these are the 3 things that stand out to me, right? Board succession, board development, and board assessment. The other thing that struck me was he mentioned how effective a board is also contextually applied to the life cycle of the charity. So a board on a startup charity could be different from a board that's more matured, yeah? And a board on a charity that's declining would also be quite different. Yeah, so we have to put that into context. And the third one, of course, is the number of charities that are not complying. When I first took on the job last year, the first bomb that came to me was that about 300 charities are not complying. What can we do about it? Yeah, and I am very confident that with a collaborative approach, we can get there to, even I'm a dreamer, yeah, we can get to 100% compliance in the years to come. So that's Commissioner's presentation. And as to your presentation, Lenard, what really stood out for me is you call it a refreshed CNPL. And it really brings me a lot of joy. As you know, I was the chair of CNPL before. And the reason why we set up CNPL was to build capacity and capability for all the charities in Singapore. Yeah, it was disrupted for a while when it got subsumed into NVPC, but I'm so glad today that now it's like totally streamlined with NVPC. And the main point that stood out for me is that CNPL, the refreshed CNPL, is taking a closed-loop approach to governance. And the first thing that they mentioned was board governance. Yeah, so again, we're back to this theme of boards driving everything else, right? And based on that board governance, fundraising will be more effective, impact measurement will be more effective, and of course, collaboration, which is much needed for complicated and complex issues, right? So I applaud CNPL for that, and of course, CNPL is one of our shared services partner. Thank you for that. And to make it practical for you, so it's not just theory, CNPL also mentioned a tool called Board Pulse. This is automated, this is online, it only takes 15 minutes for you to know what is the status, what is the state of your current board. Yeah, you'll know the strengths as well as the gaps within your current board. And that will kick off everything else. That kicks off the succession, the development, and the assessment that I mentioned that I extracted from Commissioner's talk. Yeah, and for Vivienne's talk, well, I'm sure after you hear the talk, all of you will want to attend more training, right, to know what your liabilities are. And again, Pro Bono, being another of our shared services partner, has been so supportive in creating the Charities Lean Forward program, whereby there is no shortage of training as to what boards need to do and what are the liabilities. Yeah, so I know you mentioned one or two, I probably mentioned 6 or 8, but that's me, okay? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I think it's very nicely framed in the whole life cycle lens, right? And then taking into consideration succession, development, assessment, and I think we can further unpack, and we'll see quite a few sort of bullet points or reference points within those 3 areas. Now let me move over to Mr. Soh. What have you heard that has really struck a chord for you?
Thanks, Leonard. So again, thank everyone for being here. Maybe I'll start by just saying that really enjoyed the presentations by Commissioner and Vivienne. Very thought-provoking and extremely profound in terms of the important things that we need to all bear in mind. And of course, a great job also, Leonard, on the presentation on the refreshed CNPL. Perhaps I can just frame it in terms of 3 particular areas. It turns out that they're all P's, and so, but just bear with me. The first one is really that this notion of purpose. I think we're all in this room because we believe in something. We believe that we can contribute to a greater good, a common purpose. But, you know, good intentions alone are not enough. And I think that's really what I took from Commissioner and from Vivienne and even my colleague Leonard, that really actually there is work to be done. Because if you just come in and say, I want to do good, you can actually get into a lot of trouble and actually affect, you know, our beneficiaries, affect the larger society. And so Commissioner's point, I think, about to do good, actually you need to do well and do it correctly, do it right. And I would say that that really is something that we really need to take to heart, because even the 300, I think those that need to comply, I would say please comply. But think about that as perhaps 10% of the number of charities in Singapore. The other 90%, actually, we can all do well to continue to improve on our governance, on the way that we run our charities, because that ultimately is how we serve society. So purpose is the first one. Secondly is the people. And really, you know, what is there in the charity sector, except a lot of big-hearted, passionate people who want to do good for society. And it's not, I think the board, ultimately, the buck stops here. The board has to take responsibility. But I go back to the code of governance that, you know, under principle 2, that is actually about an effective board and management. And really that combination of board and management working together well working together in a complementary fashion as one team. And to be able to do that in an effective way, I think will set up the charity for success. One of the reasons and inspiration for us at MVPC and CMPL to go beyond board, the work that we do at boards, which was, I think, very impactful for many years, is that we need to add on this element of where does the management come in as well. And that's why we are looking at a refreshed CMPL that has a much broader scope and really helping also to bring along management, because we need the management to also implement a lot of the things that the board wants to do. So I think people is the next big thing that I took away, that, and all of us, we are all here because we believe in something, but we also need to bring along management and bring along the rest of the organization. The third P is performance. I think it's not just about a checklist, it's not just about submissions. I think those are important, those need to be done. But we need to see beyond just taking a test, because what does taking that test help us to do as an organization? And I think the real value, the real impact, and the theme is about societal impact, is when our beneficiaries feel the difference, when our stakeholders understand what we do and believe in the cause and want to contribute more, whether it's time or their treasure. And I think the notion of trust, this is ultimately what will make or break our charity sector. And we all have a role to play, because all it takes is one bad apple to spoil the whole barrel. And we know that. We've been through those sorts of situations before in the past. So we all have a collective responsibility, and I think we want to perform not just in terms of our own charity, but also as a charity sector for the good of Singapore. I think these are the three things. So purpose, people, and performance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. It was also very nicely summed up with the three Ps. Maybe at this point, I'd like to ask Commissioner, in your opening address, you have helped to unpack what good governance looks like. Maybe say a little bit more, if you could ask, about some of the underlying challenges facing the sector.
Actually, in working with many of you and interacting with the different board members in the course of work, my office, the staff, and ourselves have three categories of three reasons we often see. Very often the charities tell us that they don't know how to do it. That's one category. The second category is we have no time. And the third category is we don't care. So it's different strokes for different folks. The first category, you don't know how, we can come alongside you and we can try to help you along and provide resources, and then you can move on your own down the road. The no time one, then we have to tell you, hey, look, you came into the charity sector, this is what you need to do minimally. You're not doing this for the COC's office, no? We gain nothing from it. You're doing this in order for you to be able to run your charity well and to have public trust. You don't want to be in the limelight for the wrong reason. And so most of them understand that. The don't care one is the most difficult, because sometimes they don't even turn up. So this is the group that fortunately are small. And so we have to deal with them in a firmer manner. No torture instruments, but firmer manner.
Love the banter, love the banter. I think we can appreciate the don't know, don't have time, don't care lensing. And sometimes I wonder also when it comes to the don't care there's always something beneath, right? What is the underlying, agenda or issue around don't care? Is there something totally different or just a very different worldview that is driving that? And I can imagine that it's really, really tough for COC and the officers to be able to have those conversations, but they are necessary conversations. And let me also try and weave in a little bit of the legal dimension, right? And I think just chatting with some of the members of the audience, after listening to the liabilities and the risk, it is natural that there's going to be some concerns and some almost fear, right? From your experience, Vivienne, are there one or two things that you can help to strike a better balance, about the importance of taking the role seriously, but at the same time not being paralyzed by the fear of the legalities.
Yeah, thanks, Leonard. So actually, if you look at all the reported cases, right, and I tried to summarize some of it, there are actually not that many reported cases. The prominent ones are the ones that got reported, the Renci one, the Venerable Shi Mingyu, then you have the NKF group, then you have the temple cases, and then a smattering here and there, which I think in a way, look, if you look at the cases, they involve serious criminal breach of trust. Someone took charity funds, they took the gold from the temple safe, cheating cases, falsification of documents. I mean, these are real crimes, right? Which goes to show that actually if you act honestly and put in place processes, it's not that easy to fall below those baselines. But like what Tony said, I mean, actually all you need is one bad apple and the whole sector gets affected. And then everybody has to review all their processes, right? So, I mean, one case is one case too many already by the time you fall below that. But if you look at the cases, it boils down to two main categories. One is just a total lack of supervision. Letting a CEO or the management run amok, sometimes because that person is such a superstar, such a big personality, such a rainmaker, and nobody on the board dares to question. So that boils down to your board strengths, your board management, and if you have a weak board, you let your CEO run amok, and then you have all these cases. The second category are those who actually consciously acted in conflict of interest, where they wanted to use the charity for self-benefit rather than for, for the benefit of the charity. So largely it's down to these two categories of cases, which goes back to my point that you do need to put in place proper people, proper processes, exercise due diligence and sufficient oversight. I think it's quite hard to fall below those legal standards. So I think volunteers like yourself and people on your board shouldn't be overly daunted, because if you go by your general principles of due care, of honesty, of acting in the interest of the charity and of clarity of purpose, it's generally quite difficult to, well, get charged in court and end up as a case name.
Thank you for the assurance. I think it will be helpful for all of us, who, as we interact with our stakeholders, to be able to take away some of these points, right? Because it will become important as we engage future volunteers. Now, love the questions. They are flying in fast and furious. I'd like to be able to take some of them, and even though some of them may be directed specifically at one of the panelists, I'll also seek the views of others as well, just to be able to create a bit of diversity and perhaps share some different perspectives. Okay, we've got a top voted question. It goes, several medium to large size charity boards still seem to be reluctant in enforcing board renewal despite the emphasis placed by the new code. Now, it's phrased as, how will the COC handle this? But I'm sure that everyone in the panel could maybe share 1 or 2 points about their views, their perspectives, and some possible actions. But to kick off, Commissioner, would you like to comment on this?
We did not make the board renewal and board term limits mandatory. I think if we did, there would be the Hockley riots all over again. So we decided to revise it, but this time put on notice that it really is there is a 10-year time limit for board members and a 4-year for treasurer. So we go on the principle of what we call comply or explain. Now, when the charities who don't do their board renewal, they are now obliged to go and explain, and you are going to be held to account by your own people, or the members of the public who decide whether or not they want to donate to you or to your charity. I think you must remember the accountability, as we've said many times, is not to the COC's office. It is actually to your donors, your stakeholders, your partners whom you are actually taking money from, or you are doing services from, or the grants that you are receiving. So you must always remember that when we are running a charity, our accountability are to these groups of people. And the more transparent we are, the greater faith they have in us, and therefore the funding, the support, the volunteers will come. If you don't, then it is death by 1,000 strokes. It's a slow death, and you don't even know you're being bored at some point in time. All it takes is one problem to happen, one complaint to come, and we find that there is truth in the allegation, whether it's corruption, conflict of interest, over-familiarity, overstepping, overreach, then you're going to have a problem, especially when it goes out public. And with social media, really the judgment that will come will be swift and will be painful. So my advice is really do your best, try and make sure you put in place your board succession and planning and renewals, and do it properly and have the right mix and diversity of people within your boards who are competent, and who are not competent, then you train them so that they become competent. Thanks.
And Madam Chair, on succession, right, is related to your reflection point as well.
So I like to scrutinize the questions and the intent behind the questions, right? So when I look at the question, it seems that the person knows who are these several medium and large-sized charities. Yeah, I'll be very curious to know who they are, and you can anonymously tell us that, so that when we look at the comply and explain, we will pay special attention to the explain part if they're not complying. That's how we work collaboratively, right? But I also like to address that, the three categories from don't know, no time to don't care also applies to the topic of board renewal. I do want to look at it from the angle of blind spots. To what extent do these directors not think that it's necessary to upgrade themselves or equip themselves or replace themselves? How willful is it? Maybe they don't even know that the 10-year limit has any implications at all, because they are so personally attached and emotionally committed to the charity. They can't see all of this. And all they can see is there will be harm done to the charity if I leave. Right? So last year we had so many questions surfacing on the 10-year limit, ranging from, but my board needs me. If I leave, who's going to connect them to the donors? And I'm the one bringing in all the funds. Is that a blind spot, or is that a reality? Now, another resistance would be, but we cannot find board members who are like me. That's definitely a blind spot, right? Our ecosystem has advanced so much that if you don't know that there's facilities from CNPL or SID who can help you find your board members or even train your board members, you have been living in a cave, right? And then there's this other category of religious charities that say, but we are accountable to God, so God has appointed me to be here perpetually. Blind spot, blind faith, I don't know, but it's definitely one of the two, right? And there are some that says our constitution comes from outside of Singapore, because we are accountable to some headquarters somewhere. And they say that I have to be the one running it. There are many ways you can contribute to your charity without remaining on the board. You can be an advisor, you can chair a committee, you can be a patron. Call yourself whatever you need to motivate yourself to still give to your charity. I am sure the stakeholders, the beneficiaries, the whole ecosystem will appreciate you more as a result of that, because you know when to be king, and you know when to, or queen, and you know when to step down gracefully, right? So if it's about blind spots, then we are back to the topic of director training, council training, governor training, whatever you call yourself. It's the starting point is the knowledge that you have before it grows into understanding and wisdom, right? So how many of you are actually making it a point to attend director training that is so prevalent? We have so many shared services, 11 of them, and still growing, and all of them want to train you, right? And the kind of materials they put up for the training are really top class. You can see that they put their heart and soul into wanting to train the charities. So we are no short of opportunities for training, but we don't have enough of you stepping forward to make time for the training. What's going on there? And every time I get into a topic like this, I start to dream. Is there a day that will come when training becomes mandatory? Yeah? And I actually raise it to the council and to commissioner, and we go back and forth on this, right? Of course, everything else has pros and cons. But I really like to hear from you this time, yeah? From you here live as well as online. And if it's possible at all, let's do a quick poll. Yeah, I really like to assess the ground sentiments. If we were to go with mandatory training that is affordable, that is accessible anytime to your convenience, and that's relevant to your level of directorship experience, I really wonder how many of you will vote yes or vote no. If majority of you vote yes, I will be really trying to make it happen. But if majority of you say no, I know then I don't have the support of the crowd. Yeah? So perhaps just spend some time answering this question, because it's very important to the council as to how we should proceed with regards to director training.
Okay, everyone, as you can see, there is a QR up there. Participants both in person and on Zoom, go ahead and log into Pigeonhole Live and enter the poll. You can see the question there is, do you think mandatory training should be provided for board members across different experience levels, assuming it is affordable, accessible, and relevant? Okay, the passcode is there, and we'll give a couple of moments to look at the results. Okay, I think we have about 400 in person, 700 online. Let's see if we can, at least half maybe. Yeah, we've already got about 200 over votes. Yes is leading at 84.6%.
Yes, but it's good. It's getting there.
Come, let's see if we can hit 350 votes. You can do it. How, Madam Chair? It looks like it's the 80-20 rule.
Now I know how the elections feel.
Right, everybody warming up, is it? You know, while that is running, I also like to perhaps share some of the comments that have come through on that question, right? And yep, to your point, is it really reluctance, or you cannot find people to come forward, in which case there are different services and programs? There was a comment about how to prevent a checkbox mentality in board renewal, right? There's also apparently a carousel approach where you rotate, but it's the same people, you step out for the minimum period, and then you come in again, or I think in some cases, we can probably see that you move charity to charity, because you know, you have your networks, you have your friends, you have your pals, and then that happens. Yeah, apparently many boards and CEOs seem to be intentionally creative when it comes to how they can still be compliant and keep to the status quo. I feel this is always going to be a challenge, right? Because just like other areas, in terms of like what I mentioned, impact measurement, right? There's always going to be how much is enough? How do we strike that balance? Too much, it becomes onerous and unpractical. Too little, and then definitely that's just a pure checkbox exercise. But you know, where I think I can appreciate that we do sometimes there's a little bit of a gray space. But if you go back to the point about the sense of purpose, you go back to the point about are the decisions in the best interest of the charity? I think these are some of the principles that we'll constantly remind ourselves of. Okay, let's see where we're at. Not bad, 382 votes. I think we can move from here. Yeah, Madam Chair, it's really about 80 plus.
I'm very happy to see this, and I would say the future is bright, yeah, for governance.
Yeah.
Because I can see that there's an overwhelming support for mandatory training. Yeah, so it is my intent to somehow move towards that endpoint. And of course, we are going to calibrate where we are now and where we will be with mandatory training and see what is the impact on that. So thank you very much for your participation. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate the votes. I'm sure a lot of maybe the program developers or the people who are thinking about the solutions will bear in mind the 3 conditions, which was affordable, accessible, and relevant. So we need to make sure those principles are kept to. Okay, great. I want to take another question. It's also highly voted. It's in the domain of AML and CFT. And I think in the prep for this session, I think we can have a 3-day retreat around AML. But maybe I'll just kick off and ask Vivienne, if you don't mind, are there just a quick, for the benefit of the group today, 2 or 3 quick points about what we can take note of for AML?
Thanks, Leonard. Yeah, AML will take a long time to go through. I think just 3 quick points. I think to begin with, all of you should have a properly documented AML policy. I'm not sure whether it's already in place and whether everyone has that. You can find resources online that normally sets out the principles which you have to follow. And point 2 is basically, AML is about knowing who you are dealing with, knowing who your donors, where you're getting money from, knowing who you are giving monies to, understanding their activities, their funding, so you don't inadvertently fund the wrong causes, and who you are partnering with and the people that you bring into your organization as well. It's pretty much like what banks and lawyers do when we say KYC, right? It is knowing the people, finding out their nationalities, where they come from, and where their source of funds is usually. So that's point number 2. And point number 3 is just look out for transactions that are out of the ordinary. I think you would know that suddenly, say someone wants to give only in cash, like really cash, in paper cash, things like that, or a small series of small transactions across. There will be things that you may come to your attention, and those are the things that you should pay attention to rather than turn a blind eye to. So those are just very generally principles that you can follow.
Okay, thank you, Vivienne. The question talks a little bit about the platform giving.sg, but before I get to that, I'd like to also hear from Commissioner about any specific points you'd like to highlight about AML.
Yeah, just to add on what Vivienne had said, apart from looking at the patterns of the donation, last year when we were running the webinar with Pro Bono, there were many questions. I think people were in a state of anxiety because they don't know whether their charities have been compromised. So fortunately, we went through an exercise, we communicated with the charities, we gave some advisory to explain what needs to be done, and some have come back, but it's not a huge number that had been affected. Of those who have been affected or had some charitable donations given to them, I think as far as we know at this point in time, it doesn't seem to be related to ML activities. I think it's more like buying karma or something now. So we are grateful for that, but the awareness is useful. I think there are a few things like Vivienne has said that you need to look out for. So for example, if somebody gives you a large sum of money and then tells you, I want 2 board seats, or tell you that I want part of that money to be given to another entity that you have no clue who that person or the entity is, those should ring an alarm bell already. Or after giving you the money and say, I want a refund in cash. So you know that there's something wrong. And if you suspect that there's something wrong, then you need to make a STRO report, right? So a STRO report means you go to the website, the police, CAD, you submit your report and you tell them, hey, this looks funny, and you explain the details of it. It won't take you very long. And then CAD site will follow up. I can guarantee you there's nothing that's going to happen to you. They'll be very grateful that you actually submitted a STRO report for them to then subsequently follow up if they have to. Ultimately, so last year many charities asked, can you give us an ABC of what to do? So we can't give you an ABC because each charity is quite unique in its own. We can only give you a general principles as what Vivienne explained and what I've just mentioned as well. So boards need to make an informed decision. The key to whether accepting a donation, ring-fencing it, or returning a donation that you suspect is suspicious, that is a board's decision to make. You also need to understand, if I were in the board, the key thing I would ask myself is, do I return this money, keep the money, and so on and so forth? What will it mean for my charity moving forward? By accepting the money and spending it, even for charitable purposes, will my stakeholders, will my partners, or my future donors cast a shadow over or doubt over my integrity as a charity? If it is, then don't touch the money, right? Return the money and have nothing to do with it. If you feel that, look, this is it's in line with my policies, I think these are not suspicious transactions, we carry on, then so be it, no? So it is a best effort basis. It is not a mathematical formula that we have for you. It is your best effort. When asked or queried, you say, this is what we've done, these are my policies, and we look at it and say, yep, it's a sensible approach, that's fine. Don't need to be in great anxiety or panic over it. There are templates to follow. There are we try to simplify it as much as we can. You can take a look, but please contextualize that to your charity's needs. For some charities, $10,000 is it's not a lot of money. But for some charities, $5,000 is a lot of money. So it's a little different, depending on which charity sector you come from. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Commissioner. And the question was specific about Giving.sg and some of the processes, and maybe I invite Tony to comment on that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Leonard. So for Giving.sg, we do not accept anonymous donations. End-to-end, on the donor end, you will have a situation where either they use a credit card, they use PayNow. So you go through the financial system. If it needs to be traced, it will be traced. On the other end, the receiving end, only registered charities are allowed to receive donations. So ultimately, it is not an anonymous transaction. If need to be traced, we can trace. We have, on occasion, due to the monitoring, flagged certain transactions to STRO. As Commissioner says, the Suspicious Transaction Reporting Office. But we do not have a so-called embedded screening process. First of all, the volume is very high. And secondly, we are not the platform is not the one receiving the money. So actually charities do have a responsibility, because you receive the money, to take a look at it, and as Commissioner has explained, consider what to do next. That will be a judgment call that the charity needs to make. We are, nevertheless, looking at various ways that we can improve the system. So there are certain more automated mechanisms, but that's still very much in the exploratory stage. Happy to have conversations with charities if you think that that's something useful that we can incorporate into Giving.sg in terms of the future releases. So it's just to be clear that charities do have a responsibility and should not rely on Giving.sg just to do the screening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Soh. I'm going to try and cluster a few questions. There's several around the size of charities. Let me just kick off with this one on, there is a requirement for a minimum of 10 board members for smaller charities with niche causes. They might face some challenges. Should we focus on finding a good fit rather than trying to fill up the space, and can this requirement be reviewed? Maybe get some comments from a Commissioner on this particular point? Or Madam Chair?
Let me have a go at this. The statement says there's a requirement for minimum 10 board members. So I assume you are a society. Because if you are a CLG, it's minimum 3 board members, right? So for a society, it's under the Registrar of Societies. So it's the ROS Act. It's not our act, right? So you are answerable to the Registrar of Societies. There's a reason, I suppose there's a reason why you need 10 board members, because most societies are membership-based, yeah? And if you are membership-based, it would be advisable to have a good representation of your members on the council itself. Why 10 members? It's probably historical. You may want to check with ROS. Yeah, but it's definitely a compliance. Yeah, something you will have to abide with. And if you're a small charity and you have trouble looking for board members, you can still go to CNPL and SID, and then after that convince them to be members, and then member of the council, right? Because then they would be representative of their membership. Okay, I hope I've answered that question. It's rather straightforward.
There's another question on with respect to smaller charities. This one is more high net worth private donors prefer cause-based giving, especially to smaller startup charities or small or minority in relation to small and minority communities. How to incentivize them to give when some charities are not IPC?
Okay, this is an opportunity for me. That's why I wanted to answer. Remember, I talked about the life cycle study that we are doing with Ernst & Young, whereby we will be profiling the charities on 7 stages of the life cycle, from startup to growth stage, to impact stage, to decline stage, to turnaround stage, and maybe to a terminal state. Yeah, some charities try, they still can't make it. Yeah, we have to acknowledge that and give them an exit. Yeah, and this is where, you know, when this exercise is completed, we will relook at the way we are providing training, right? Training to startups will be different from training for mature charities. It also gives us an opportunity to relook at how funding is done. Funding for startups could be different for funding for mature charities. And in the private sector, there are private sector organizations that want specifically to give to startups, yeah? Which means if we are very intentional about how private sector can support the sector, the charity sector, this life cycle profile could create opportunities for us. Yeah, and I believe NVPC with the Company of Good and the fellowship programs, they would be able to relate to this. Yeah, and charities can work with NVPC to pitch to the private sector potential donors if you are a startup small charity. So bear with us. There are many ways you can do it. And our code has a principle number 6, saying that you must be transparent about your communications strategy to your stakeholders. Yeah, so I would say spend some time thinking about your narrative. There is a reason why your charity is small. You want to be niche. You are serving a very niche market, a very niche set of beneficiaries. And I think that will pull the heartstrings of a very niche group of donors as well. Yeah? So think about your narrative. We are trying to put in place a few partners who can help you craft your narrative and make sure that you publicize this narrative, whether it's on social media, your website, whatever, word of mouth. All these are different approaches you can use to send the word out and attract the right people to your cause. I hope that's helpful.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. There are a couple of questions around, I would say, balancing roles and duties. The next most popular question is, how do we strike a balance so that the board does not over-dictate the secretariat operations but still play an advisory role for the charity? Could I invite Mr. Soh, having experience in not just in running an organization but also sitting on different boards, any thoughts or advice on how to strike that balance?
So, I mean, we all know, you all know I'm CEO of MVPC, but some of you may not know that I also am president of YMCA and chairman of the Focus on the Family. So, interestingly, I'm an executive at MVPC, but I also serve on the board of these 2 charities, actually a few others as well. Actually, it's a very interesting dynamic because, and the point, again, principle 2 about effective board and management is actually, I think that particular principle is tremendously powerful, because if you have a effective board and management, a lot of the other principles actually start to come up very nicely, because the board and management are the ones that actually will help drive the growth of the charity. But it requires that there's a certain maturity, there's a certain trust in the relationship between board and management. The board needs to know what they bring to the table, what their responsibilities are as the governing body. The board needs to understand its fiduciary responsibilities, but also its sort of generative role, the role that it can play in helping to advance the cause of the charity. So it's not just a so-called goalkeeper. It's not just about just to guard and prevent bad things from happening. It also wants to contribute to making good things happen. But you cannot do so by becoming the executive. You cannot do so by micromanaging the executive team. So it's a question of how do we balance that out in such a way that there is a good relationship, they complement each other. There may be situations, there could be short-term incidents or situations where the board needs to step in a little bit more, perhaps even bringing experts from different areas to help the management overcome the particular issue or incident. And then once that stabilizes, the board needs to step back and just continue to provide that good support. So I cannot emphasize this enough. I, on my own, when I in the two charities that I chair, take a lot of time. I spend times on my one-on-one time with the CEO, because I think that relationship between the chair and the chief executive is extremely important. Because the chair represents the board, the CEO represents the executive. If there's good trust, there's good flow of information, there is that sense of, this is my role, I want to offer you my support, my thoughts, the resources I can harness for the good of the charity, but I want to empower you to get the job done. So there's that need to know where the clarity of roles, the need to be able to say, it's almost like a dance, right? You cannot say every single board chair should behave like this, every single CEO should behave like this. It depends on this charity, it depends on the situation, it depends on the personalities of the two individuals involved. But I think the ultimate aim, again going back to the purpose, must be for the success and long-term thriving of the charity. And it may be just point about succession, that if it comes to a point where it is about one person, whether it's the chair or the CEO, and that's where the thing about renewal and succession becomes a problem. That's when the clash of egos can create problems for charities. Yeah. But if we think about the greater cause, and we think that when I've done my job, I have done it well, I'm ready to prepare a successor to take over, whether board or management, and they step off the stage gracefully, I think that's how a charity can continue to thrive and not be caught up in these fights between board and management or chair and CEO. So I think it's a very delicate dance, but it's worthwhile spending a lot of time and effort to make sure that their relationship is strong.
Thank you. Vivienne?
No, sorry. I just wanted to add, I think there's a reason why it's a different set of role. One is board and one is management, and if the board gets into management, it will cease to be effective as a check and balance. I think it's very important to have very different roles so that they actually act as a check and balance on each other. So I just want that to, because once you get down into the grind of the day-to-day, it's very easy to lose objectivity. And being on the board allows you to have that clarity of purpose and objectivity to act as a proper check.
Thanks, Vivienne. Oh, okay. Madam Chair, you have a comment?
Yes, I wanted to comment. So, because the question says that how can the board continue to play its advisory role? So, is this an advisory board, or are we talking about a fiduciary board? Yeah, a fiduciary board then becomes very different, right? Because Vivienne talks today about the duties of a fiduciary board, from complying at the very basic, looking at compliance at the very basic level and moving up to conformance and performance. Yeah, so there will be tensions. Tensions is normal. If you don't have tensions, there's something wrong. Yeah, but what you have to guard against is the tensions growing into a conflict. Then you have a breakdown in the board management relationship. Yeah, I just want to highlight that there is a program by Singapore Institute of Directors in partnership with the Social Service Institute. It's called the As Good program. There are 8 modules in the program, And the module number 3 is called Board Management Relationship. And it's facilitated by charities themselves. So you will hear a lot of real-life examples of how board and management can work together constructively. Constructively means there is constructive tension, right? It doesn't mean you live in peace and harmony, no such thing. Yeah, because we are talking about fiduciary duty here. And the main approach of the board is to ensure the highest level of challenge as well as the highest level of support. How do I challenge my management? How do I put all the goals in place, the controls in place? How do I monitor them? These are all challenging, yeah? And of course, supporting is, how can the board help you? Who can I bring to you? You know, how can I help in raising funds? That's the support, yeah? So imagine the board, if they challenge critically and support critically as well, you would have an effective board. If they challenge too much and don't support enough, you have a very controlling board. And that's when you can address the issue. But if they support you too much and don't challenge you enough, then you have a laissez-faire board, and that is going to be problematic as well. You may end up not submitting the GC checklist and the financial returns, and that's not good either. And if your board is not even challenging or supporting, I would say this is an absentee board. You can just replace them. Yeah? Okay, so these are just key points for you to think about when it comes to board management relationship.
Yes, indeed, Madam Chair, I don't think anybody wants to be number 301. But thank you, Mr. Soh, Vivienne, and Madam Chair for your comments on this. It kind of reminded me, I think there was another question around, you know, coming back to the life cycle of charities. When you're very small and you're starting out, right, the tendency is that the board members will be very, very hands-on. I think that we recognize that there's practicality, there's reality of the situation, but the question is, you know, how much longer can you function that way, and how quickly can you reach a point where you're able to separate the roles more clearly. And I think to Madam Chair's earlier point about the study and the life cycle, I think we'll probably be able to draw more insights and be able to share perhaps other thoughts on how that can be better managed. Okay, there's an interesting question here around civil servants. We have excellent candidates for the board. However, many of them are civil servants and are unable to serve on the board. I wonder if there is a restriction for those in the civil service. I will make one quick comment and then I will ask the civil servant. I can imagine that a lot of it has to do with your conflict of interest. And if you're recusing yourself from every other decision, how effective can you be? So maybe, Commissioner, any thoughts on that?
I don't think there is any restriction for the civil servants to sit on charity boards. But yes, they do need to declare their conflict of interest, which I just did yesterday to my boss, right? So I am on a couple of charities, so I have to tell her that, look, I'm on this charity. If there's anything wrong with these charities, then Deputy Christie will report directly to her and to Minister. So I don't believe there is a restriction on civil servants sitting on a board, but they need to get the permission from their supervisors, and they need to make sure that there's no conflict of interest. Yeah, so please go and look for those that you think are suitable to be able to help you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. I'm not sure if this is legally related, but I don't know if Vivienne has any thoughts on this. There's a question around, do we need to buy insurance for board members and why? Or if there's any other comments from the panelists or to share their thoughts on this, it will be helpful to answer a 12-vote question.
There's no legal need to buy, but I think on all the boards that I'm on, we do generally buy D&O insurance, directors and operational insurance. It's a good practice to have. Whilst I shared about the liabilities, it doesn't cover criminal liabilities, which is a personal liability. So if you are charged for any reason, the D&O doesn't cover anyway. But it does cover your day-to-day operations, and sometimes in anything that you do, even whatever business that you run, there are always potential third-party liability. So there are a whole string of insurance that most properly run organizations would have. And covering the board is one of them that you would want to ensure that if they act in good faith and there are people who happen to sue them for whatever reason, that there is actually recourse to insurance who would cover not just the legal fees, but actually whatever that may be found against them. Primarily, usually it covers legal fees so that they don't have to be out of pocket when they do succeed in defending the claim.
Thank you, Vivienne. I've got a cluster of questions that I would say are around the demand and supply dynamics of volunteers onto subcommittees and boards. It touches on a couple of programs and it touches on perhaps what does the industry think. I will take a question around the CNPL board match program. And for those of you who are familiar, this is basically a way to source for volunteers, make sure that they are suitable, and then match them to the charities accordingly. The question is around how successful it has been, what kind of numbers we're talking about. I would say where we are today, it has been a bit of a challenge for different reasons. It's a very high-touch program, and therefore it becomes very difficult to scale. You want to be able to know your client and understand the charities very well, understand the volunteers very well, so you can increase the chances of a successful match, but then therein lies the limitation. I would say on average, pipeline numbers a year, roughly about 70 or so opportunities, of which we're able to do a match or at least a referral to a charity almost most of the time. And then when it comes to placements, it's closer to, I say, about 50% of that number. And again, there are many, many different reasons, right? The human dynamics of this are complex, right? And sometimes you only realize something that fits or doesn't fit. It takes a bit of time for that to happen. So in that regard, we're also thinking about how we refresh that approach, so it's not just a one-to-one, but a one-to-many and a many-to-many type. So you've seen like models like the State of Play, where we create a kind of trade fair kind of approach. We are also trying to organize a little bit more of that, so we get a bit more liquidity in the market, get a little bit more exposure for both the volunteers as well as the charities. So that's a quick one on board match. There was a question around what does the panel think about, there seems to be a shortage of suitable directors for charities. What does the panel think the industry as a whole can do about this? Anyone would like to make a comment about that? Mr. Soh or Madam Chair, you look like you're going to say something, right?
What do you mean by suitable director, right? So a lot is your, yeah. So when you are looking at renewal of your directors, you must start with your purpose statement. What is it you're trying to achieve and sustain for your charity, right? And that will be translated into a strategy, which is a long-term work plan for your charity, involving the engagement of multiple parties or stakeholders. And that would require a diverse set of skill sets. Yeah, whether it's different domain skills, which is the first thing charities always look at. We need lawyers, we need accountants, we need HR specialists. Yeah, but less so the charities look at soft skills of directors. For example, are my directors able to think strategically? Do they have a foresight for the future? Are they able to make decisions within a complex ecosystem? Now, these are the executive leadership skills that you also have to incorporate onto the plate in your search for directors. In my opinion, there isn't a shortage of directors for charities. Just talk to CNPL, ask them how big the database is, how many directors are there in the database still waiting to be matched. Ask Singapore Institute of Directors, there's a rep here. Ask them also how many thousands of directors are in their database waiting to be placed. So it's not a supply issue. The issue is the demand. Why are charities not stepping forward to accept these services? Yeah, because we do have the warm bodies. The question is, are you willing to accept these warm bodies as part of your board? Yeah, so I do not think the industry as a whole need to do anything. The supply is already here. The supply has been waiting for many years for the demand to increase. Yes, so this is another blind spot that I would like to address. Yep, Thank you.
And Mr. Soh, maybe comment a little bit about the board match and the partnerships that we have.
So maybe 2 quick points. One is that in the work that we do with companies and also as multipliers of the work we do with companies through the trade associations and chambers, actually, whenever you talk to them about getting their executives to contribute in the non-profit space, this notion of serving on the boards of non-profits always comes up. So I give you one specific example. The American Chamber of Commerce, we signed an MOU with them last year in celebration of their 50th anniversary. And one of the key elements of the MOU is really for MCHAM members to serve on non-profit boards. So actually they have lots of people who are interested. Again, Madam Chair's point that actually the supply is there. The second point I would make is that demographically, if you think about Singapore and where we're going, you know that there is a certain age profile, right? The so-called 1 in 4 will be 65 by the year 2030. Many Singaporeans are going through that life stage, 50s and 60s. Actually, a lot of very qualified executives are retiring, semi-retiring, and actually looking for meaningful ways to contribute to society. So many of them, so not just in those working in companies, those they're kind of stepping off the corporate treadmill, really are looking for ways to contribute. Again, there will not be a shortage of directors. Really, it's really for our charities to consider what skill sets are needed and really engage widely, engage these groups. So the thing about engagement of stakeholders is not just you look for donors or volunteers, engage people who are interested in the cause because eventually they can translate into donors, volunteers, and even board members.
Thank you.
I
Yes,
thought I'd
Commissioner.
just quickly add to the question as to why there's a lack of demand. So actually there are a few common reasons I noticed is that a lot of the boards would like to only recruit members onto the board, people who are either like-minded, who are no outsiders, or people that they are familiar with. So they are not, they know that there's CNPL, they know that there's SID, but the thousands of board-ready persons in these 2 outfits, they're not willing to go to. So when we ask them, why not? And they say, oh, because we don't know who they are. I say, well, then you have tea with them. You know, you could always invite them for tea, you could have a chat with them, you can put them onto some kind of a small committee to look at some small thing that if it goes wrong, it's not going to kill you, in order for you to be able to be familiar with them. So I used to have a very, very forward-thinking chairman of a stat board I used of which I was the CE before. So my chairman, I spent many, many lunches and dinners with him interviewing people. One of which is a High Court judge now, okay? Before he became a High Court judge, he was very interested to serve on that particular stat board. So I met him first. I said, this guy is brilliant, no? But I'm wondering why he wants to serve on my stat board. But he just wants to serve because he wants to do something useful. Then I introduced him to my chairman. And of course, we wanted him to come on board. But before he could come on board, he became a High Court judge. So we lost a High Court judge. But the point is you need to go out and actively look and not be afraid to do that. After all, it's just a lunch, and to widen your net. Because right now, if you only depend upon other board members' networks, then you are narrowing yourself. You're depending only on volunteer base, then you're also narrowing yourself. These should continue. These are best practices, please continue doing it. But do tap on CNPL or SID's pool, because there are very many good people. And I'm very sure you can find somebody, and you're not so sure, then just give them an opportunity to do things which match their interests as well. You broaden your base, you increase your mix, and then you have, before you know it, you have your renewal and your succession planning in place. I'm not asking the charities to change all your 10 members at one go. I think that's a very silly thing to do, but you do it in phases, and you prepare people in advance. You train them, you transit them, you recognize them, and you honor them for what they have done. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll take a quick question on the training. I'll make a quick comment on that, and then I will touch on a couple of policy-related questions. So the training question, the point was most of our board members have full-time day jobs, and that's the reason for not stepping forward. I think in the idea of bringing forth, whether is it mandatory or highly encouraged training, it has to be in the form that is most accessible to the users. And it's a question of how do you make it bite-sized, online, modular, just to be able to increase the likelihood that a person who is time-starved and really super busy schedule still be able to maintain that learning dimension. And of course, it's a two-way street, right? You want to be able to continue to serve, you need to be able to remain current, relevant, and understand what else is happening in the space. So that's that balance again that we try to find. So that's a quick comment on the training. A couple of policy-related ones. There's a question on online, is online fundraising considered public fundraising? And when does it become public? And I take it, or I assume that there's a portion of this that touches on whether a permit is required or something along those lines. Maybe, Commissioner, you're able to comment on this part?
Not answer the question properly, then please raise your hand and tell me, yeah? I just met somebody just now and asked that they want to do a fundraising dinner with a close group of people and donors. So do they need to apply for an FRFCP permit? The answer is no. If you are doing online fundraising for your charity here, for your local purposes, then you just carry on. The FRFCP permit is only required when you are doing fundraising from the public for a foreign cause. Then you need to apply for FRFCP permit. Sorry? Yeah, I'm 59, I can't hear you.
Disclosure regime.
Yeah. So if you want to do fundraising, public fundraising for street-to-street or house-to-house collection, then yes, you need to not apply for FRFCP permit, but you have to do what we call the enhanced disclosure regime. Last time, need to apply for police license, remember? But now, no need if you are a registered charity or exempt charity or with a valid FRFCP permit. That means you go and disturb the public life. As long as you go into the open, go to publicly accessible places, go to people's houses, you need to make known the details of your fundraising on what we call the enhanced disclosure regime. If you are not any of these entities I just described, then yes, the police licensing still applies and you need to go to police to apply the license. I hope I've answered your question. Thanks.
Okay, the next one is, I would say it touches on the policy of receiving gifts, right? So in view of the recent corruption case involving an MP, how does the panel view a charity leader receiving a gift in good faith versus potential corruption or bribery intention? I would imagine most organizations have some sort of declaration policy. In the space of interacting with partners, there will be times where gifts are exchanged. It's a question of how do you manage it from there, right? Is it declared? Is it then you give it away and so on and so forth? But I'm not sure if there's anything else on this kind of policy or any comments that can be made on the CU side.
You know, sometimes I have to meet some of the charities for work-related issues. So one day I went for a meeting with such a charity who wanted some things which we couldn't give because in violation of certain regulations. So the person was very kind, said, okay, I understand, and so on and so forth. So I reached home. Next day, there was this gigantic box of chocolates. Yeah. And it was oh, I say, oh my goodness. This puts me in a very difficult position because as a COC, I cannot accept such things. But how to return the chocolates to the very kind lady is very rude, right? Because the fellow took the trouble to give the 100 chocolates. So I must tell you, first I made a declaration, and then after that, every cleaner, every security officer in MCCY was very grateful to this lady. So basically, don't go and take anything that is of personal benefit. When in doubt, if you can return, if it's not rude of you to return, then return. But if it's going to be rude, especially if it's a perishable, then you better make a declaration to whoever your boss is, and in your charity case, I guess, to go and tell your ED or to tell your board member, and then the safest is go and distribute the loot to everybody.
Maybe I'll just add 2 quick points to this. I mean, apart from the declarations, one of it, I think there's 2 more points. One is the intent for which the gift is given. I mean, I guess that's always hard to show, but if you're in a business relationship, if your charity has a relationship with the person who gave you the gift, they want to land a contract, they want to do your IT, you know, stuff like that, then I think that's bordering on corruption. So you've got to be very careful for things like that. Don't even get into that. And secondly, I think it's the size of it lah. I mean, if someone gives you some fruits, it's de minimis, right? But I mean, if it's a huge box of chocolate and it's very, very big or something, then I mean, I think some amount of discretion and good faith and honesty has to come in. But I think the bottom line is, is there a purpose? Are you going to be compromised because you've received something from that person and you then cannot exercise independence of mind?
So you just give me a minute to explain my behavior to some of you, huh? So many of you are I meet the charity leaders are very kind, so they want to meet me over lunch, right? So Ken, but I need to buy the lunch, okay? I tell you first. So if you are going to buy the lunch, I cannot accept it. Number 2, many of you like to extend invitations for the COC to attend the charity event. So it's like the 100th anniversary and all that. And these are very important events. But I can't attend them. And it's not because of anything else except that the perception of attending one but not another is not right lah. So on that count, I have to reject. It's not because of anything to do with you, but it's to avoid a wrong perception that the COC favors a certain charity or certain sector over another. So for those of many of you who have invited me for all your events, I just have to apologize. But I thought I better explain to you this is the reason why it's so. Because sometimes it's the perception puts everybody in a very, very difficult position. Yeah, thank you for accommodating my idiosyncrasies.
The next thing I'll do is invite a commissioner out for lunch, because then I can get free lunch. I just want to share one example. Not too long ago, I was offered tickets to Taylor Swift. I don't know whether you think I'm a Taylor Swift fan, but you know, maybe yes, okay. I do know a few songs, but the point was this: I don't think there was anything direct at that point in time, but there is a business relationship, and in the end, I declined. But the point was this: I did not want to get anything close to even feeling obligated to this organization. You know, I thank them for their kindness and so forth and all that, but I think it's for all of us, exercise good judgment, that even if it's not today, not tomorrow, but down the road, you might feel obligated to this particular organization or individual. It's always best just to decline. I think in Singapore, the notion of corruption is very serious, not something that we want to take lightly. But it can be something as attractive as that. I don't know whether the Commissioner eats chocolates. If you don't eat chocolates, then maybe not an issue. But maybe you love chocolates. So, but for me, I think it was really that notion of, yeah, maybe I like Taylor Swift, but you know what? I'd rather avoid it. If I want to go, I'll just buy my own tickets.
I feel I have to say something. Because sometimes I do attend your dinner and dance or anniversary dinners, right? Because I'm an advisor to the regulator. So I'm not a regulator, right? Yeah, so just in case you think I'm being biased, I'm not, yeah? Because I'm a promoter, I'm an enabler, right? So if I think my presence help you, I would do that, yeah? But having said that, I also have to say no, just because like last Christmas, I had like 18, and I think I might have overdone it, so because I was in my first year. And some of you also kindly send me hampers, right, over the New Year or Chinese New Year. And I did go through that, oh, should I not? And I come to the realization that if in doubt, just donate it to the charity unit, and that's what I did. Yeah, anytime you're in doubt, just veer on the side of caution, yeah, in order not to send the wrong message. So with any gifts that come to me, I would just defer them to the charity unit and send a thank you card to the sender, also through the charity unit. Yep. And for lunches, no, I don't buy the lunches.
Very, very useful information. Okay, I would like to draw the panel to a close. I think there are a few more questions, and I think we'll discuss with our colleagues how we can address some of those questions subsequently. But just to wrap, I have a question for each of the panelists, and basically it is, what is one question that you either get asked too often or don't get asked enough? Okay, I learned this from someone. So I'll start with Ms. Lim, and then I go to Mr. Soh, and then Madam Chair and Commissioner.
Can I do last?
You can pick. It's either you get asked too often or not asked enough.
Did I get asked too often? Well, I guess people ask me about legal liabilities of board directors. Yeah, so I guess for me, maybe because of the role that I play in charities and my profession, so a lot of the questions surround liabilities. And since this is a sort of like a closing thing, I guess in a way, like liabilities are really just the base of it. And it is really to help us to grow beyond that, to know that, look, these are baselines and we need to go beyond that to achieve at a higher level. So although people come to lawyers asking only for when there are problems or when they are trying to avoid problems, I think we hope to go beyond that conversation and go into more governance, how to grow it, how to get more diversity, how to get more people involved. And that probably is the conversation that this whole sector seems to be moving towards. And I think it's very well poised to take it to the next level. Yeah.
Very nice, thank you. Mr. Soh.
Yeah. So in the work that I do, it's really interesting because I always get asked, how can I help? So it's really wonderful, right? I mean, because people know that MVPC is in the business of connecting organizations and individuals contributing to the greater good. So this notion about charity board match and so forth, really there are people who always feel like, is there something I can do? Not just strictly for MVPC, but for the sector, because they know that we can connect them to where the needs are. So it's really good to see, and really for charities, if you feel that you need some kind of support, whether it's a specific kind of skill set, a board member, or even other kinds of resources, do come and talk to us, because a lot of people always ask me, how can I help?
Thank you, Mr. Soh. Madam Chair?
Oh, I get asked a lot of questions about governance, but the one that tops it all is, are you paid to chair the Charity Council? And the answer is no.
And over to you, Commissioner.
The one I'm not asked enough, and is the flavor of the month, is mandatory submission. So I had this wonderful, pleasant experience last week when a Taoist temple wrote in to us and said, I'm so sorry, I'm trying to submit my mandatory submission. I need to collate a few more documents. Can you give me an extension? And we all shouted in unison, of course. And I just met the gentleman just now. He came down and he said, thank you for giving us the extension. I told him, thank you for submitting it. Let me now share with you one fantasy I have, which is, people sometimes ask me, what is one thing that you wish the charity sector would be, would happen? And because of the issues that we sometimes face, I wish that all donations, submitted via, not in physical form, but in electronic forms. I think if all these donations are done in electronic form, then you have a huge, half the problem is solved. Half the problem of all those things that I see will be resolved. So every day before I sleep, I pray that more and more charities will move their donations online, whether you're a religious group or non-religious group. But I just want to thank you for paying attention and listening, because 4 years ago, when I first started out, nobody in a similar forum like this there were no questions on board renewal and board succession. Now, 3 years later, every webinar, every training, there will be many questions on board succession and board renewal. It indicates a growing awareness and understanding of the importance, and I hope that will then translate to tangible actions. So thank you very much, all of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, a louder round of applause for all our panelists. Thank you so much. We've come to the end of the panel. I'd like to hand over to Amba.
Thank you, Leonard.
Thank you so much.
We just asked the panel to remain on stage as we take a quick photograph. Okay, once again, thank you very much, Commissioner, Madam Chair, Mr. Soh, and Ms. Lim for spending your time with us and for your valuable insights, and Leonard for moderating the panel this morning. Thank you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, hope you found our event in conversation with the Commissioner of Charities and Charity Council 2024 useful. For our audience watching on Zoom, your feedback will help us to make future events more relevant and useful to you. For our audience here, do scan the QR code on the projector screen to access the survey. If a charity needs legal advice, please email at assistnpos@probono.sg. With that, on behalf of the Office of the Commissioner of Charities, the Charity Council, Pro Bono SG, and the National Volunteer Philanthropy Centre, thank you for joining us and have a good day.